Jake Lawson had always been a man of the land. For as long as he could remember, he had worked the ranch that had been passed down to him from his father. The ranch sat on a vast stretch of land in the middle of nowhere, isolated from the hustle and bustle of the world. The only sounds that ever reached Jake were the cries of hawks soaring overhead, the rustling of the wind in the trees, and the occasional low moo of cattle. Life on the ranch was quiet, peaceful, and above all predictable. Jake had always liked it that way. In fact, he preferred the solitude. He didn't need company, and he didn't want it. People came and went, but they were always just visitors, fleeting and temporary. Jake, however, was permanent. He had built his life on this land, and nothing, no one could take that away from him. But things weren't always as simple as they seemed. Jake had learned long ago that even the quietest lives could carry hidden pain, and his was no different. Years ago, he had lost someone close to him, someone he had loved deeply. That loss had changed him. It had made him cold and distant, and it had taught him that the less people got close, the better. Emotions only led to heartache, and so he shut himself off, one painful piece at a time, until the only thing left was the land, the cattle, the house. But on this particular afternoon, his peace was interrupted. A car, covered in mud from the long, winding road that led to his ranch, came rolling slowly down the dirt path. It was an old sedan, clearly not built for the harsh, rugged terrain that surrounded his property. The car came to a halt at the edge of his driveway, its engine sputtering to a stop. Jake, who had been working on mending a broken fence, stood up and wiped the sweat from his brow. His eyes squinted in the direction of the car, wondering who would be driving through such a remote area. A young woman stepped out of the car. She looked out of place, out of touch with the rugged surroundings. She was dressed in a neat, casual outfit that was clearly not made for the dusty, untamed land Jake called home. Her hair was tangled from the wind, and she looked frustrated, trying to open the hood of the car, clearly unsure of what to do next. Jake had never been the kind of man to offer help to strangers. In fact, he usually went out of his way to avoid them, but today something was different. Maybe it was the desperation in her eyes or the fact that she was alone, stranded on a road that could leave anyone stuck for hours. She caught sight of him standing by the fence, and her face lit up with relief. "Excuse me, sir," she called out, walking toward him. "I'm so sorry to bother you, but my car broke down and I don't know what to do." Jake paused for a moment, his usual reluctance rising inside him. He didn't want to deal with this, didn't want to get involved, but he also couldn't just leave her stranded. After a long moment, he sighed and nodded. "All right, you can come in and wait. I'll take a look at the car. Thank you so much," she exclaimed, her voice full of gratitude. She introduced herself as Ella Roberts, a name that didn't quite match the country feel of the ranch, but Jake wasn't one to judge. She seemed out of place, but there was something in her that made him stop and listen. As Ella stepped into the warmth of the house, Jake couldn't help but notice how young she looked. Too young to be out here by herself. Maybe she was just lost, or maybe she was one of those city folks who thought the country life would be easy. He wasn't sure, but he didn't want to make any assumptions. As the afternoon wore on, Jake worked on the car in silence while Ella sat on the porch, trying to pass the time. She was friendly, asking him questions now and then, but Jake kept his answers short. Small talk was never his strong suit, and he didn't feel the need to get to know this woman. She was just passing through, after all. Ella, however, wasn't one to be easily dismissed. She had a way of talking to people, of breaking through walls that others had put up. It wasn't long before Jake found himself answering her questions with more than just the bare minimum. She wasn't intrusive, but she was persistent. She wanted to know about him, about his life on the ranch. Jake found himself talking more than he had in years, though he still kept much of his past hidden. The conversation eventually turned to the storm that was expected to hit that evening. Jake mentioned that it would be a bad one, and there wasn't much chance of her getting her car fixed until the roads cleared up. It was obvious that Ella was stuck at his ranch for the night, whether she liked it or not. "Looks like you're here for the night," Jake said gruffly, wiping his hands on a rag. Ella smiled, not at all bothered by the situation. "I don't mind. Actually, it's kind of nice to be away from the city for a while. It's peaceful here." Jake just nodded, unsure how to respond. He wasn't used to strangers being so comfortable around him. Most people, after a few minutes with him, would either leave or make some excuse to avoid him, but not Ella. She seemed completely at ease. and that made Jake uncomfortable in ways he couldn't explain. Later that evening, after the storm began to rage outside, Ella sat at the small kitchen table while Jake worked in silence. He tried to focus on the task at hand, trying to avoid looking at her, but every now and then, his eyes would flicker toward her, catching glimpses of her trying to make herself useful, helping around the house, cleaning up the small messes that Jake left behind. It felt odd in a way he couldn't quite explain. Ella asked about the ranch, about how Jake had come to live here alone. It wasn't an easy question for him to answer, but she didn't push too hard. Instead, she shared bits and pieces about herself, how she had been driving across the country, taking a break from her hectic life. She had no real destination, just a desire to escape the chaos of the city for a while. It was clear that she was different from anyone Jake had ever known. She didn't look at him with pity, didn't offer empty words of encouragement. Instead, she simply accepted him as he was, even if he didn't fully understand why. As the night wore on, and the storm outside grew stronger, Jake's thoughts began to race. He was torn, between the need to protect his solitude and the pull of something else, something unfamiliar. The tension between them was palpable, but it was an unspoken tension, a slow-burning one that neither of them seemed ready to acknowledge. And yet, no matter how much Jake tried to avoid it, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change, something he wasn't sure he was ready for. Ella Roberts had come into his life like a storm, and just as quickly she seemed to be breaking down the walls he had spent so many years building. The storm outside raged on through the night, its fierce winds howling like a wild animal. The rain beat against the windows, making a loud and constant noise. Inside, the warmth of the ranch house was a sharp contrast to the chaos outside. The flickering light from the oil lamp cast long shadows across the room as Jake and Ella sat in silence, each absorbed in their own thoughts. Ella had been quiet for a while, her eyes drifting to the window, watching the sheets of rain pour down. It was hard to imagine anyone being stuck out there in such a storm. Yet she was here, inside the house of a man who seemed as distant and isolated as the land around them. She couldn't help but wonder about him, about the life he led, and the things that had shaped him into the person he was now. For the past few days, she had noticed a hardness in Jake, a stiffness that was more than just physical. It was in his eyes, in the way he spoke, in the way he kept people, including her, at arm's length. There was a wall around him, thick and unyielding, and she could sense that it wasn't something easily broken. She wasn't sure why, but something in her had the urge to reach out to him, to help him, even if it meant stepping into territory that was clearly uncomfortable for him. At first, Jake had been polite but distant. He had fixed her car and given her a place to stay for the night, but that was the extent of his kindness. He didn't ask her about her life, didn't try to get to know her beyond the basic details. And that was fine. She wasn't here to make him into a friend or even to become one herself. But as the days passed, she began to realize that there was more to Jake Lawson than the gruff exterior he wore. There was something deeper, something hidden beneath all the layers of pain and pride. As they sat there, the tension between them seemed to grow, thickening in the air. It wasn't a bad tension, not exactly, but it was one that neither of them knew how to address. Ella shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her eyes darting over to Jake, who was standing by the fireplace, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the flames. She opened her mouth to speak but stopped, unsure of what to say. There were 1,000 questions on her mind, but none of them felt like the right one to ask. Instead, she let the silence hang for a few moments longer, trying to think of something that might break through the thick, suffocating atmosphere. Suddenly, Jake turned to her, his face set in a hard expression. "I don't want to talk about it," he said, his voice low and rough. Ella blinked, surprised by his sudden statement. She hadn't said anything, hadn't even hinted at what she was thinking. But there it was, the weight of his words, as if he had been waiting for her to ask about something he couldn't bring himself to talk about. "You don't have to talk," she said gently, trying to reassure him, though she had no idea what it was that he was so determined not to discuss. "I'm not here to make you talk if you're not ready." Jake seemed to relax a little at that, though his posture remained tense. He took a step closer to the fire, his gaze dropping to the flames as if they held the answers to all his questions. But Ella could see the turmoil in his eyes, the hidden pain that he was trying to bury under layers of silence and anger. Ella didn't know what had happened to him, but she could sense that whatever it was, it had broken him in some way. The man standing in front of her wasn't the same person he had been all those years ago. He had lived through something that had scarred him deeply, leaving him with a heart full of regrets and a mind full of memories he didn't know how to handle. "I didn't mean to pry," she said softly, almost to herself as she stood up from the chair. "I'm sorry if I've made you uncomfortable." Jake shook his head, his jaw tightening. "It's not you," he muttered. "It's me. It's just, I don't know how to let people in. Never have." Ella's heart gave a little lurch at his words. She could see it now. The depth of the struggle he had been carrying alone all this time. She had seen it before in other people. That hesitance, that fear of letting others see the broken pieces inside. It was a common thing, really. People who had been hurt so deeply that they built walls around themselves. Walls that were too high and too strong for anyone to break through. "I get it," she said quietly, stepping closer to him. "I really do. But you don't have to do it alone. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to let someone in." Jake looked at her then, really looked at her. For the first time, he saw her not just as a stranger who had wandered into his life, but as someone who cared, and for a moment that terrified him. The weight of his emotions, the confusion and the years of holding everything inside, pressed heavily on his chest. He had always been the strong one, the one who didn't need anyone else. He had been taught to take care of himself, to rely only on his own strength. But now, in the quiet of this small house with the storm still raging outside, he found himself questioning everything he had believed. Ella stepped even closer to him, her hand resting gently on his arm. Her touch was soft, comforting, a reminder that there was kindness in the world even for someone like him. "Jake," she whispered, "you don't have to be strong all the time. You don't have to carry everything by yourself. You're not alone, okay?" For the first time in a long while, Jake felt the walls he had so carefully built around his heart begin to crumble. It wasn't a dramatic moment, and it wasn't an instant change, but in that quiet moment he felt a shift. A small one, but enough to make him believe that maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to keep pushing people away. Maybe there was a way to let go of the past, to face it and heal. The storm outside had finally begun to slow, its fury dying down to a gentle drizzle. But inside the house, the atmosphere had changed. The tension between them was still there, but it was no longer an enemy. It was a bridge, one that could lead to something new. Jake turned his gaze back to the fire, his mind swirling with thoughts and emotions he had long buried. He knew that healing wouldn't come overnight, that it would take time, but for the first time in years, he felt like it was possible. He didn't have all the answers, and he wasn't sure where this road would lead. But at least for now he wasn't alone. Ella stayed with him through the rest of the night, not pushing him to talk anymore, but simply being there quietly, patiently, like a steady presence in his life that had been missing for far too long. As the night faded into the early hours of the morning, Jake realized that perhaps the storm had not only passed outside. Maybe it had passed inside him too.